Good morning, Senators. My name is David Mistagni. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in opposition to this bill on behalf of PORAC. With all due respect to my law school dean, Mr. Chemerinsky, this bill will not apply to federal officers, yet the severability clause means that its restrictions and the legal jeopardy will fall solely on California officers who don't enforce immigration law. Since 1890, the Supreme Court has held that under the Supremacy Clause, federal agents are protected from state criminal prosecution if acting within the broad contours of official duties. Federal officers are immune from state penalties, including the civil sanctions in this bill. Although written as a generally applicable law, it cannot be applied to federal officers if it interferes with federal operations. States do not have authority to second-guess the efficacy of federal policies, including masking. Federal agencies authorize masks to protect officers' identities and safety. Banning facial coverings with this conflicts with this federal policy and will trigger what's called conflict preemption, because officers cannot comply with both sets of rules without compromising their safety and mission effectiveness. Moreover, in Arizona versus United States in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down state laws that intruded on federal immigration enforcement. This same field preemption applies to this bill. I want to talk about the knowing and willful. A violation under the bill means intentionally wearing a mask, means intentionally engaging in the act, not intentionally breaking the law. This general intent standard exposes officers to lawsuits for assault, battery, false imprisonment, malicious prosecution, with $10,000 damages even when there's no actual harm. The bill's notwithstanding any other law clause overrides basic protections like indemnification under Government Code 825. This exposes officers to personal liability for good faith mistakes about whether an exception applies. This bill removes critical immunities that protect officers when making good faith arrests, relying on probable cause, or exercising lawful discretion. The legislature has consistently refused to weaken these protections because they're essential to public safety. If this bill passes, it sends a clear message that officer immunities are now on the table. It will become the biggest impediment to recruitment and retention in this state. We respectfully urge a no vote.
Thank you very much. I will now take Me Too testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 627. If anyone wishes to express their opposition, please state your name, organization, and position on the bill.
Mr. Chair and members, Corey Salzillo on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association, locally elected sheriffs across the state, we're in opposition to this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Randy Perry on behalf of PORAC and strong opposition.
Hi, Dylan Lasowski with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, and the Riverside County Sheriff's Department in opposition.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Matthew Seiberling on behalf of the Association for Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs, the California Peace Officers Association. Also been asked to communicate the opposition for the California State Law Enforcement Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the Sheriff's Employee Benefit Association of San Bernardino, all in opposition. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Ryan Sherman with the Riverside Sheriff's Association, California Narcotic Officers Association in opposition. Also in opposition on behalf of the California Reserve Peace Officers Association, Placer County Deputy Sheriff's Association, and Police Officer Associations of Arcadia, Burbank, Brea, Corona, Culver City, Fullerton, Murrieta, Newport Beach, Novato, Palos Verdes, Pomona, and Riverside, all in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to express opposition to SB 627? Seeing no one else, I'll bring it back to the committee for questions and comments. Who would like to begin the discussion? Senator Caballero, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the discussion here today. Senator, can you talk a little bit about the amendments that have been proposed and some of the discussions that may have occurred around the amendments that were discussed?
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate, I called Mr. Feldman and also Mr. Ferry, like I think the day before I introduced the bill to give a heads up, make clear we have an open door, and we, and we've had conversations. We were told early on that PORAC had decided not to engage, which is fine. No one has an obligation to engage. We've had more conversations with the chiefs. We removed a particular piece of the bill that I don't want to speak for them, but it seemed to me was one of the biggest bones of contention, which was requiring if an agency went into another jurisdiction with masking, they had to notify them in advance. That caused a lot of concern. We removed that from the bill entirely. We added new exemptions to the bill. We made various refinements to the bill. We've always been open to making those refinements. I think what Mr. Feldman was referring to is that Senator Perez and her bill, they had worked out, which is a different bill. I mean, they're companion bills, but a different bill with different issues because there's also existing law around identifying yourself as an officer, which is what 805 deals with. They worked out various amendments, and they wanted us to sort of transfer those amendments over to our bill, and we did not think that that made sense. I also, I do just want to say one thing. Mr. Feldman indicated that agencies are prohibited from adopting any policies after July 1st, 2026, such as new agencies. That's not what the bill says. The bill says that that's your deadline. You know, you have the 6 months to do it. Doesn't mean that they can't change it or adopt policies afterwards. I just want to make that really clear. That's not a fair reading of the bill at all.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, Mr. Feldman, here's the challenge that I have at this particular point in time is that I think that we do a really good job in California of, I think the police agencies do a really good job in California of protecting the public. And one of the things that I think we've all worked on is having every member of the community feel like going to a police officer is an important thing if you've been a victim of a crime or if you're scared. And that's really important. The number of times that I've been on the freeway system and somebody's following me, I don't like the look of it, and I pull into a CHP office somewhere on the highway. It's a place to go when you want to feel safe. That changed this year, and it changed enough so that I had to call people and tell them, family members, if I disappear, look for me, because I'm not leaving voluntarily. I'm not going to hide. I'm not going anywhere. And that is because of the lack of protocol of individuals. I don't think they were peace officers myself, because they didn't know how to handle difficult situations, and when the people around them became aggressive, they left. They turned and left. That's not what trained officers do if they're rightfully in the place where they're supposed to maintain the law. And so for me, as a fifth-generation U.S. citizen, fourth-generation U.S. citizen, to have those thoughts because of the color of my skin, where I may hang out, where I may be eating, where I go to get my car washed, it's frightening. And so the challenge is, and I really appreciate the analysis, the constitutional analysis, but frankly, things have been upended, and not only kind of on the streets, but also in the courts. And I am very worried about people showing up that I can't identify, that do illegal things and I can't identify, and that they do it under color of law. So the challenge I guess I have is if you could, what's the biggest concern? Police officers never wore full ski masks. I mean, they never did. And so what's the biggest concern that you have? And maybe it's something that we can resolve, we can settle down the road. But This one is really personal to me, and it's the reason I'm a co-author. But I'm very sensitive to the issues that you raise. We want to make sure that they can use face coverings for health and safety issues. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about doing an operation where they don't have to show a badge, they don't have to identify themselves, they can be covered. And if they're doing things legally, then they shouldn't have to worry about their safety. So I'm not sure if I asked a question in there, but I think
No,
so.
I appreciate just hearing the perspective. And I know, I mean, most of the committee is a co-author, so I understand, as I said at the beginning, the gravity of the situation. And the police chiefs do too. I mean, they have immigrant friends in their community. They are put right in the middle of this as well, dealing with it. And it is incredibly difficult. It's one of the reasons that the police chiefs historically have worked with the legislature on sanctuary state policies and TVs and U visa programs and Senator Perez's bill 805, because we do want to help dispel those concerns and show our values, the California law enforcement values. So the concerns with the bill, the exemptions are limiting, and it's very practical. I mean, the stuff that I listed out about you can't wear a helmet when you get off the bike, that's in the bill. The fact that it applies to helmets, headgear, tactical weapons, or tactical headgear, not just face masks. I mean, all of that is personal protective equipment that is limited in this bill to an extent that is concerning to us. The immunity provision is incredibly concerning to us because the standard that they create, and I know they talk about knowing and willful being a higher standard. It's a general intent standard. It's low. It's just that they took the actions. We feel an unfair and unreasonable shot at some of the core protections that law enforcement needs. And then, Senator, to the date, I'll show you in the bill, it actually does say no later than July 1st, 2026. So that means any policy after that is ineligible for the protections. Some of these are kind of more technical issues that probably need to be clarified through definitions or, verbiage changes. The immunity provision, which was, as the Senator noted, he did take out a logistical piece of the bill that was very concerning to us, but then put in the immunity provision right after it. So it's trading one bad provision for the next that's actually even more concerning to us. So again, understanding where we are and the situation that we're in, and knowing that this bill is going to pass this committee and pass the legislature and end up on the governor's desk. I don't know what happens at that point, but we're going to have two options. We're going to have to come back here and fix this together next year. And if it doesn't get signed, we're going to have to come back and find some meaningful ways to actually address this together. I do think, as we worked with Senator Perez on her bill, that California law enforcement and the legislature working together probably sends the strongest message about our unity in the face of the concerns that we all share. So I very much appreciate just hearing from you, your personal perspective. I've heard it from a lot of members, and I understand it very, very well. Unfortunately, like I said from the beginning, our concerns are very practical in the language of the bill and things that we're going to have to fix at some point.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just a few clarifying points, just to respond to some of the things you raised, Mr. Feldman, and I appreciate your testimony, but I have to just clarify, section 7289A says by July 1st, 2026, a law enforcement shall maintain and publicly post a policy. So it means that they have to adopt a compliant policy. It doesn't mean that any prior policy is not operative. So, Senator Wiener?
Yeah, I think he's referring to F.
F?
F right here. The criminal penalty shall not apply.
Okay.
I think when I read it, it doesn't say you can't ever adopt or change afterwards.
Correct.
And I'm happy to do a letter to the Journal to clarify that. It's about the deadline to do it. It's not about freezing it in amber. So I'm happy to do a letter to the Journal
It's more technical.
on that.
I don't think that was the intent, but
Yeah.
it's a technical reading of the bill.
Yeah, I have no issue if there's any ambiguity around that.
And then in section 3, 185.5 subsection D, it says a motorcycle helmet may be worn by an officer utilizing a motorcycle or the vehicle that requires a helmet for safe operations while in performance of their duties. So I don't read that to mean that when they get off the motorcycle and they are wearing a helmet that they're in violation of the policy. I think it comes down to the question of what does performance of their duties mean, and if they need to wear their helmet and it's specified in their policy that they can wear a helmet even when they're not on the motorcycle because they need to do it for traffic safety purposes, I would argue that's that's consistent with the definition of performance of their duties.
May I respond?
Yes.
Respectfully, sir. It does say utilizing a motorcycle. So I read that to mean that they have to be utilizing the motorcycle. Yes, it does then qualify in the performance of their duties, but it says a motorcycle helmet when worn by an officer utilizing a motorcycle. That is how we read it to mean that as soon as you get off the bike, you got to take the helmet off. Again, probably something that is more technical that we
Yeah.
can clarify, but those are the type of concerns we see throughout the bill that give us concern.
Senator Reiner.
And what I will, listen, the requests for amendments that were made were, I think, much more fundamental to the bill. I always, in every bill I do, when people come forward and say, hey, this language, I think it might be a little vague here, and we can talk about that, and that's my practice. I don't think when I read that it's like if you step off the motorcycle, even assuming a motorcycle helmet would qualify, because motorcycle helmets, other than like the Evel Knievel kind of situations, have a clear mask and they often lift it up. Same with a riot shield. If you can see the person's face through a transparent, plastic, that's not even, I think that's not even covered by the bill. We put that in there out of an abundance of caution. And if they're wearing one of those Evel Knievel things, I would probably not want CHP to be, or a police officer to be wearing that kind of covering. But we're always open if someone, and we're happy to sit down about like truly those ambiguities, whether it's a letter to the Journal or follow-up legislation, and we're always happy to have that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Any other members wishing to ask any questions or comments? Vice Chair Sierra.
Very much, and thank you both sides for your perspectives on this issue. And it's a really important issue. And one of the things I'm seeing is problematic, is that we are emptying the quiver at what we think is directed at the ICE and the federal government. And instead, we're hitting our local agencies, and the federal government, I think, will be eventually, when we get done spending our taxpayer money on it, they're gonna be right that, yeah, we have no authority over their operations and the rules and regs that they have in their thing. And one of the reasons I say that is, having come from a city that has a local police agency, and then having CHP right down the street from us in the neighboring city, and also having the sheriffs, which are more of the county agency. The local agency cannot create rules that tell them how to do their operations. The CHP has theirs. They're a state agency. Local agencies can't make rules for the state agency. It goes the other way. The state can make rules that apply to the local agency. That's what we do up here. But it doesn't go that way. And that's what you're asking. That's what this effort is trying to do, is trying to make a state rule that we're going to apply to the federal agency that is actually, that's not how it works. And so I see that as a futile waste of our taxpayer dollars. Some comments have been made. Increasing fascism, that's one, I guess you could call it one perspective. But a lot of people in this state, too, see it as the real problem is we have creeping public safety risks that we have done nothing about for the last few years. And the subject of immigration is one of those. The federal government, in the last administration, let the pendulum swing to an absurd level. And now we're dealing with an administration who, whether they're right or wrong, has taken a directive, they think, or not, from the public that says, hey, we want to get a handle on this. And now they're doing what they are doing now. And so the author here may think that this is a disastrous federal administration, but you also come from a state where your opinion is overrepresented in every facet of our administration. And a lot of people in California think California's administration has been disastrous. And a lot of them are reacting by moving out. And policies like this are one of them. I don't think any one of you, none of the people on this committee have been in law enforcement, out on the streets, and I don't mean law enforcement in a courtroom, I mean out on the streets, in cities that are a lot of time overrun by dangerous people. And I'm not talking about immigrants, I'm talking about, or not illegal immigrants, I'm talking about just dangerous people in general. And some of the things that they have to go through to protect themselves, but also to protect the public. One instance that I can tell you in my district that was personal to me was a lot of times if our officers are confronted with a situation, it would probably be better if they didn't get identified immediately, because then the other person, the bad person, gets the jump on them. And that jump on them means they're dead. And that's what happened to one of the officers in Riverside County that lived in the city I live in. He pulled up, there's a domestic violence situation, he's immediately identified as a cop, he gets shot dead before he can even say, hey dude, what are you doing? We also have situations where we have different types of crime overrunning communities. And in order to get at the core of those crimes, police agencies, local police agencies, have to use their personnel to go out and form task force. And some of those task force, I can tell you, SWAT teams, that's one of them, gang units, drug enforcement units, stolen vehicle units. And because they're such a small unit, their folks do need to keep their identities secret. You know why? Because the bad guys aren't just a single bad guy out there stealing cars or stealing guns or selling drugs. The bad guys out there are usually part of a bigger group of bad guys. And if they're identified, they don't go after them. They go after their families. I watched this firsthand. And it wasn't, I'm sorry, it wasn't a law enforcement officer, but this is how they, this is how they think. We're not going to go after that person because then his friends will come after us. But what we will do is we're going to go burn his house down, or burn down the house of his cousin with his cousin and their baby inside. We're going to go take the guy who shorted us on the drug deal, and we're going to tie up his girlfriend's hands and her feet and then burn her in an alley and make him watch. That's the kind of mentality that they have to deal with out there in the street. We are taking the tools away from them to be able to do that, all because we don't want people who have violated the law to get caught. It's part of the de-incarceration movement. I don't care what it is. What I see is a total lack of understanding by a lot of people of what's out there and what they have to deal with. And what they have to deal with is just like I have to deal with it too sometimes when I was in the service, when I was part of the fire department. We'd be in situations where I needed the police, but they had to approach what I would get is the undercover guys. Because they could arrive on scene quietly, get into where they needed to be, and then deploy without being identified until they say, we're the police, you guys back up. And we had to do that quietly with our radios. We had a signal that we would have a code that we would tell them. That means we're in trouble. We're being surrounded by one gang that wants us to save guy and another gang that wants him to let him die. And if we know we're going to lose. And so they have to keep their identities quiet until they can get into a position to do something about it. And that's when they identify themselves and are able to control the situation before more people get shot, more people get hurt, and sometimes those are us. So you can't make laws that address all the situations that go on, especially in the world of policing and public safety. And one other thing, when you're talking about scared people, you know, they're scared looking at their, you know, how they appear. I've had to teach many, many classes when I was in public education, doing the public ed for our fire department. I had to start from my uniform that's completely identifiable as a firefighter. And then I had to show the kids what it looks like when we're completely dressed with our breathing apparatus on, making that hideous noise. Because what we were finding were kids were hiding from us. They'd hide, they were scared to death. And that's part, you know, we can't help that. We'd have to go in and find them. We figured out they crawl under beds, they hide in closets, and if a kid was inside, that's what we'd do. Our search would be go right to the room, go right to the bed, get into the closet, find them. And you know what? They were scared to death when we found them. They didn't say, oh, good, a firefighter. No, they thought some freaking monster from outer space was coming to save, to get them and finish the job that this house fire was about to do. They didn't identify us. They couldn't identify us. They were scared. But you know what? We picked them up anyway, kicking and screaming, handed them out the window, took them out the door, whatever we needed to do to get them outside. And that's why sometimes you don't have your uniform on that helps identify exactly who you are to everybody, because you're never going to achieve that. This bill is a reaction to something. And whenever we have a reaction to something, usually that means bad policy is written. And this bill has bad policy written all over it. Because we keep talking about, oh, we're going to, oh, we'll fix that. Oh, we're going to talk about, oh, we'll clarify that. We have a 2-year session. You want to keep working on this? Keep working on it. But this nonsense of bringing it to public safety when our last public safety meeting was supposed to be a month ago, and then cramming it in at the last minute, is not the way to do good policy. And it's certainly not good for public safety, which is what this department's supposed to be about. This committee is a public safety committee. And we are not promoting public safety with this. What we're doing is fighting against the federal government, just another arrow aimed at them that's missing the mark completely. So with that, I did have a couple of questions. No, I think they answered most of the questions about some of the immunity issues. And I don't think, unless you can think of more instances where people try to conceal their identity so their families don't have to suffer the brunt of a more organized gang unit or our gang presence that will be able to identify them and go after their families. That's why. In this case, it's bad people. Bad people wear there, you said it yourself, Mr. Author, that people wear masks when they're robbing a liquor store. Is that illegal? Robbing a liquor store is, but is it illegal for them to wear a mask on the street? I don't think it is.
Is that a question or a rhetorical?
That is.
What I will say is I do not want to have a society where someone who's arresting you looks like the guy robbing the liquor store. That's the problem, because the guy robbing the liquor store should go to prison. But the person enforcing the law is someone who's actually supposed to, when they come, you should be like, oh, good.
The guy robbing
and when the guy arresting you looks like the guy robbing the liquor store and you have no idea who it is, that is terrifying. And I want to also say, this is a public safety committee, and it's about the safety of the public, which is under assault right now as people are being grabbed by people wearing ski masks.
Okay.
So the difference is
And it is a crime that is a crime, wearing a ski mask when you're
robbing a store. Yes,
that's an
it is.
additional crime.
But wearing a ski mask without the robbery is not a crime. People wear them all the time when they're out there doing the rioting and things like that.
If someone's
And so we haven't gotten to that point.
walking down the street wearing a ski mask, that's very different than saying,
Chair, I would like my time.
I'm grabbing you and putting you in a car.
So, Senator Sciarto, I do want to give other members an opportunity to speak, but you have the floor. So
I just have one more point to make, and that's regarding the ski mask. The reason that robbers wear a ski mask is so they can get away with the illegal act that they're doing. The reason that law enforcement wears some concealing, whatever it is, whether it's a mask or whatever it is, to conceal their identity, is for their safety and the safety of their families and the ability not to be recognized. They are not breaking the law. And also,
They are breaking the law.
stop the unlawful or unreasonable acts. What's unreasonable to you may be completely reasonable to the rest of us. And in this state, we don't know what that is, because 85 or 75% of representation in this state is being voiced by you and not 40% of the people out there. So that's all.
Okay.
And I didn't ask a question. If you want to respond, you can respond.
Yeah, 1 second. I will give you an opportunity to respond, but Senator Ciarta, you've finished? Okay. Senator Wiener.
They are very much violating the law in very profound ways. I'll leave it at that.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Senator Wiener for bringing this forward. I know obviously we've been working on companion legislation related to this issue. Obviously, this has become a huge topic of concern because of what is happening with federal immigration enforcement officers in our communities. And it has created so much fear and so much harm and so much chaos. You've heard me talk about it before, and we did an adjourn in memory for him, but Roberto Carlos Montoya Valdez was killed just a month ago when running from ICE agents in the city of Monrovia. He was a Monrovia resident and a day laborer, and he is no longer here. His family no longer has a father because, you know, he was running away in fear. And this is a man that had no criminal record, no criminal history. And so we see these things happening in our communities. And, you know, I think for us as state legislators, we're trying to figure out how to respond. Before I got elected to office, I didn't anticipate that I was suddenly going to be in a fight with the federal government. And we would suddenly be in this middle of constitutional crisis. And it has certainly thrown, I think, all of us for a loop. With that being said, I do know, and I've heard very clearly from our local law enforcement some of their concerns. And I want to ask particularly about the immunity piece, because what's been shared with me is that the immunity piece that's now been added into the bill is actually reflected in previous legislation that was brought forward before. And I wanted to see, is that true? Is that the case? I recognize that the topic of local law enforcement and immunity is a hot one. It is certainly one that I know that's happened up in this legislature previously and times before I've gotten here. And I know that it's certainly, you know, a topic of concern, particularly for local law enforcement. So wanted to understand if you know whether or not that's been reflected in previous legislation that's not been successful.
Thank you, Senator Perez. So there are limited immunities available to peace officers, and those have been amended over time. I think what you may be referring to is SB 2, which eliminated many of the immunities that peace officers previously had. There's also Government Code Section 820.4. The California Supreme Court has also interpreted this, limiting when immunity is available. It doesn't eliminate their defenses. I think much of what has been raised here is a concern that they will do something innocent in an effort to protect their health or safety, and that they will be brought up or sued by an individual. They still have a good faith defense to that, and any other defense they choose to bring forward in those moments to explain why they wore the mask and that they believed it fell within their policy. What we're eliminating here is the ability to claim qualified immunity when you, one, assault somebody, batter that person, falsely arrest them, falsely imprison them, abuse the process, or maliciously prosecute them, and that you do one of those 6 things while you're wearing a mask, and that you are wearing that mask willfully and knowingly. So it is many steps of a process that have to be taken in which the individual would then not receive immunity. Which, be clear, immunity means that we as the taxpayers are paying for a person to willfully, knowingly wear a mask and assault us. So that is the circumstance that is prohibited. Intentional, reckless violations of the law that aren't reasonable are not protected by immunity currently. If an officer walks out on the street while he's patrolling, as we saw the ICE agents, and shoots at a car without provocation, without reason, that's not going to be covered by immunity. So this is similar in that we're saying acts that fall outside of the reasonable enforcement of the law that are currently torts, the list that we have taken, those 6 that I mentioned to you, are already in the Federal Tort Claims Act. We lifted it directly from there. Those are torts that the federal agencies can be found to violate also as personal liability.
Mr. Feldman?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to my legal colleague next to me, but I will say the immunity provisions in SB 2 were rejected by the Senate. When that was proposed, they did not go through. But I'll let Dave explain.
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question, and that's one of our primary concerns for local law enforcement. The good faith defense is nowhere in this bill. It's actually stripped from the bill. It's the exact opposite of what was just said. The immunities are very minor, basic immunities. They're what provide the good faith defense. Things like if you make an arrest and there's a technical defect in a subpoena, you can't then sue the officer for false arrest if they believed in good faith that that subpoena was valid, just as an example. What this bill does is it strips away that officer's ability to assert that defense if they intentionally wear a mask, and even if they believed in good faith that they fell within one of the exceptions, they would lose all of those immunities. And so it's really setting it on its head, talking about good faith in this way. Laws, general laws mean that you intended to do the act that's prohibited, not that you intended to violate the law. You've all heard the phrase, ignorance of the law is no defense, unless it's a specific intent crime, which this is not, where you specifically intend to violate the law. This bill says if you specifically intend to wear a mask, and then it turns out that you were not permitted to wear a mask because you didn't fall within one of these exceptions. For example, it says only particularized concerns for safety would fall within the exception. Generalized concerns don't. So if an officer is exposed to a methamphetamine lab that they didn't expect, and that doesn't fall within these definitions, and it's not regular safety gear, and they just use a scarf or something to cover their face, they would technically be in violation. If they arrested somebody and it turned out that there was a technical defect in that subpoena or that warrant, they would then lose all of these immunities, which are just baseline, like that if you're acting in good faith, if you reasonably believe this was the person that you arrested, if you reasonably believed that this was a valid prosecution, it's stripping all those away, and it's saying now, if you wear a mask and you weren't allowed to, then you're held to strict liability for all of these types of claims. And then it incentivizes lawyers to sue officers by having a $10,000 statutory damage, even if there's no actual harm to the person. And the frustrating part for my clients is that it is very clear that this law is an easy win for the Trump administration. It's not going to be applied to federal officers. It's going to land on your local officers who have nothing to do with this fight and already don't enforce immigration bills. This is an easy win for the federal government under immunity and under preemption.
Thank you. That's helpful context. I think one of the challenges, and as Senator Wiener knows, because I've been going through this as well, is kind of navigating these pieces, because when we're drafting something in order to be mindful of the supremacy clause, we do have to apply it to, other enforcement right here in California. And so in doing that, we have to sweep in local law enforcement. My bill does take into account state and law enforcement. I recognize that state law enforcement was exempted from your bill, but we have to craft these things in that way. But that does have an impact on our locals. I represent 19 cities, and almost every single one of those 19 cities has very small police departments. I don't represent a very large city like the city of Los Angeles. And so I do understand the concern about lawsuits, particularly against some of these smaller agencies and individual officers. it sounds like the good faith defense that's referred to in SB2 is not language that is reflected here in this bill. Is that right, Senator Wiener?
Knowing and willful violation of the law. That's what it requires, a knowing and willful violation. If someone's acting in good faith, they're not going to be liable. And so we just have a disagreement there, and my witness can elaborate on that further.
But it sounds like that the concern is over like how we're crafting that language and that liability, like that very piece. Is that correct, Mr. Feldman?
Yeah, and I think the big concern is that the very beginning part of that clause, notwithstanding any other law, wipes out any other state immunity protections, which includes Civil Code Section 43.55 that provides civil immunity for any warrant as long as there's good faith. There's another penal code that gives us civil immunity protections for false arrests made upon probable cause that the officer has at the time. So where we read a major piece of the concern that we see coming is the fact that this notwithstanding any other law clause effectively wipes out all of these existing civil immunity protections that do protect us in these specific torts under state law. And then I think we really do need to unpack this knowing and willful, because I know they keep getting brought up as, you know, the bar to protect us. We see that as a low bar. We see that as an officer that in good faith, again, because that's the protections they're wiping out, thinks they are complying and has to do something that's outside of one of these. Again, I went over the exemptions being vague or broad or undefined, and we don't know. There's a good chance that an officer could knowingly and willfully do something that they think is covered. Turns out it's not. And then you've given up all of these immunities. And in addition to that, there's also the code section that gives officers indemnity protections by their agency that, you know, the agency would pay for the fine effectively. That's gone too, also because it says notwithstanding any other law, wipes that out. So the officers personally will be on the hook for these fines. And it's a big concern for us.
With all respect, that is an extreme interpretation of that language. When we create penal code sections, we do not in every single one of those bills list out every defense that someone can make. There's background law for that that's been around for a very long time. This does not take away those defenses. So I respectfully to Mr. Feldman, the interpretation of that's an extreme interpretation.
May I just point out one other statutory issue? If you look to Penal Code Section 7, it defines willfully and knowingly. Willfully is defined as simply a purpose or willingness to commit the act without requiring any intent to violate the law. This is to quote, any intent to violate the law or to injure another or to acquire any advantage. Similarly, knowingly is defined as a knowledge that the facts exist which bring the act or omission within the provisions of the code, and explicitly does not require any knowledge of the unlawfulness of such an act or omission. And so what that means is, using those terms, now Senator Wiener could have put in a good faith defense or could have used a different term like maliciously, but those terms just simply refer to the intent to wear the mask. And as I said before, the good faith defense is actually contained in the immunities that this bill would take away if an officer mistakenly, but in good faith, wore a mask outside of their policy or outside of the purview of the statute.
Thank you. Look, I want to acknowledge, I think, a couple of things. One, it sounds like, honestly, based off of me hearing from like both of you, that there is a way to resolve, I think, some of these things. There sounds like a wanting further definitions and clarification so that we can ensure that local law enforcement understands what the liability is. I think there's a number of ways to do that, whether it's a letter to the Journal, whether it's going through some cleanup language to further define like some of these things. And I think that that's fair. I I recognize, obviously, we're in the last, was it 3 days, 2 days now, like of this legislative cycle. So, Senator Wiener, are, you willing to have some continued conversation with them, write a letter to the Journal to just further clarify some of these pieces that, I think that they've raised just in terms of officer liability and, what I'm hearing is not an opposition to necessarily the policy itself, but wanting to ensure that they're very clear about what some of the legal ramifications are, particularly for individual officers.
Yeah, well, there are two separate things. I think there is opposition to the policy itself, and that's fair. It's democracy, and we all get to support or oppose what we want. In terms of the technical items, absolutely. If Mr. Feldman or anyone thinks that there's an ambiguity that needs to be resolved, I'm absolutely happy to have that conversation, and if needed, do a letter to the Journal or whatever it takes. We obviously have some differences in terms of interpretation, but obviously we all want to get it right, and so we're happy to have that conversation, of course.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Senator, because that's also something that's important to me. I know when we initially had this conversation about this bill and this topic area, I don't need to tell you how important this is to me. I mean, these are the things that keep me up at night, and what's happening with these ICE raids in my community. I mean, it is tragic. It haunts me, especially being a Latina and watching this happen to people that look just like members of my family. My entire family carries their passports on them at all times, including myself, and it is a very strange reality. I also, represent communities that have very small local police departments, and so I want to be mindful of them too as we're trying to craft these things. And so I appreciate you recognizing that, because that's something that's been important to me, and I know it's part of many conversations that we've had. I will certainly be supporting it. Obviously, I'm a joint author with you on this bill. It's a priority piece of legislation, for me, along with my own bill, and our bills are companion bills. I think from the start we wanted to make sure that these things both get passed. But I do think that the concerns that they've raised and wanting that clarity, I do think that that's fair as well. When we first had these conversations, we had an understanding of the problem that we were trying to address here. So, but yeah, appreciate that.
I appreciate that. I know you and your district have gone to hell and back on this, and we're now starting to see it in San Francisco with masked ICE agents or whoever they are coming into neighborhoods in San Francisco. And I've told my constituents for a while, pay attention to what's happening in Southern California, because it's coming. And I also do want to just say, in terms of this general conversation, early on we were criticized that, police officers are not going to arrest other police officers, so it's hard to enforce crimes in this way. And that's one of the reasons why, working with the committees, we included the civil piece, because this isn't just performative, it's not passing a resolution. We want to make sure that there are actually incentives first of all, for departments to adopt good policies, but also for police officers to be mindful when they're interacting with the public and covering their faces. And we're, of course, happy to have those continuing conversations with law enforcement. We absolutely want to get it right, and we welcome that feedback. And I appreciate your comments, Senator.
Yeah. Thank you. That's it. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll wrap up discussion and really want to thank the committee for the thoughtful discussion on this bill and our witnesses. I will be supporting the bill today because I think the context that we're in California and our country require that we pass this law. And just beginning this week, the Supreme Court issued a unprecedented decision that gives federal agents the ability to racially profile people in the course of their enforcement of federal immigration laws, which I would argue is unconstitutional. And so what we are seeing in California are masked federal agents or even vigilantes. We've heard reports of people claiming to be Border Patrol or ICE agents who are arresting people, kidnapping people, assaulting people, and this is happening throughout California. And that's not acceptable. And I think this is an unprecedented situation that requires this unprecedented action. But I think necessary action to ensure that federal agents or even local law enforcement cannot hide their identity. We have laws in California, and we'll get to this when we get to file item 2, that are specifically focused on making sure that law enforcement cannot hide their identity. And this is essential to ensure trust between the communities that our law enforcement officers are serving. That's also the foundation of our state sanctuary policy as well, is to ensure that we have trust, that people feel comfortable coming forward and reporting crimes. I think the witness who talked about the fact that people are calling an immigration hotline to report crimes because they don't know who to call, who to trust, that's a problem. That erodes public safety. So yes, this is an issue of public safety. That's why it's before our committee. And moreover, there are many good police officers, sheriffs, and law enforcement personnel in our state. And I want to make sure that those people who are carrying out their duties in good faith are not impacted by this policy. So if we need clarification at, next year through some sort of cleanup legislation, I'm certainly willing to work with Senator Wiener and with law enforcement groups to address that, to make sure that this is being implemented to carry out the goals of this policy, and to make sure that people that are not doing their job in a good faith effort, not intending to evade their identity or to carry out their duties in a way that's committing harm in our communities, that they are protected as well. Because we want to also make sure that our public safety officers in California, that we're supporting the work that they're doing to keep our communities safe as well. But I think this is an essential policy, and I think it's essential to public safety in California, which is really being compromised right now with the unprecedented and unconstitutional actions that have been happening in our state. People being kidnapped, assaulted. We've seen so many videos of people that have literally been thrown to the ground, that have been in the course of being arrested or detained by ICE or Border Patrol. That's not acceptable. And so I will be supporting the bill today, and I thank you, Senator Wiener, for bringing this forward and give you the opportunity to close.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the thoughtful discussion. And, as I mentioned, I have a very, very long history with my local law enforcement, working closely with SFPD, sitting next to them in court when they're being sued, handling their appeals on immunity issues. And I understand, firsthand the critically important role that they play. We also are in a truly disaster of a situation where we have secret police effectively on our streets, and it's not just terrifying for people, but it's tearing apart the fabric of society when you have people who have communities in Southern California where people are scared to go out on the street, they're scared to go to work, they're scared to bring their kids to school, and now is the time for us to say what the rules are. And as I said at the beginning, we are currently unaware of local law enforcement doing this. Can I sit here and tell you with certainty that in a year or 2 years, we're not going to see any local law enforcement anywhere in the state of California doing this? I can't say that with certainty. I hope it never happens. But let's set the rules now before we start going down potentially that path. We will sit down with the opposition to talk about if there's any kind of ambiguity that we need to address with a letter to the Journal, potential follow-up legislation. I have no issue doing that whatsoever. I want to get that right. It is important to advance this legislation. I appreciate the support, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Is there a motion? Moved by Senator Caballero. If the committee assistant could please call the roll.
SB 627 Wiener, the motion is Assembly amendments be concurred in. Edegin? Aye. Edegin, aye. Sayarto? No. Sayarto, no. Caballero? Caballero, aye. Gonzalez? Perez? Aye. Perez, aye. Wiener? Aye. Wiener, aye.
Okay, we'll keep that bill on call for Senator Gonzalez. We have one more bill